Okay, Mr. Foster, thanks very much again for agreeing to be interviewed for my project.
Well,
And just for the purposes of the tape, could you start please by telling me your name and also, if you don't mind, your date of birth, if that's okay.
yes, indeed. Yes, my name is Peter Foster, although I started with John Peter Foster, and I was born on the 2nd of May, 1919 in Berkshire.
And I've just shown you some footage of the Arandora Star, and I believe you already saw the Arandora Star before I showed you this footage, because you were once a passenger on board the vessel. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Yes, indeed. It was my parents thought my brother and I would enjoy going to the fjords because we have a Scottish background, and of course some fjords are very much like Scotland in many ways. So we went first to Iceland, and then we went to various fjords all the way around Norway, and finally ended up in Stockholm, and then we set sail for Helsinki, and that was one of the great times of one's life, because at 4 o'clock one afternoon we were having tea, and suddenly the ship turned round and the sun shone in different directions, and then the tannoy came for us all to hear from the captain saying, "The Admiralty has ordered the Arandora Star back to Southampton." And we all thought, well, this may be the beginning of something. And indeed it was. And next morning we were steaming back through the Baltic, and every morning a little aeroplane flew around the ship, and it had a swastika on it. And this was kept up until we got to Southampton. And we knew, or we guessed, what was going to happen. But in fact, it didn't happen for some time, because the war had not been declared when we got back to Southampton. But when we got there, we saw another cruise ship called the Atlantis. And it was painted white, and on the side of it was a great red cross. And we knew, well, she was going to be a hospital ship. In fact, everybody was getting ready for war. And then we happily disembarked. I went back to Scotland, where my parents were living. And the day the war broke out, I went to Inverness and volunteered to be a sailor, but I had no qualifications. And, well, he was very polite, the chap who took my application, but he just said, well, very, very, very nice, but we haven't got anything for you. So I ultimately joined the army and became a sapper, and so on.
And getting back to that embarkation on the Arandora Star, can you recollect your first impressions of the vessel? Because she had a bit of a reputation as being
Indeed, it was. Well, I had been on other liners, P&O and so on, to the Mediterranean, but this was a very luxurious and very beautiful liner, and it was comfortable. There was a band playing at meals and all the rest of it, and I had a lot of good company, people I met and remembered for a long time, and often visited again. And so it was a very splendid liner.
So in terms of exploration of the ship, did you go around and have a look and wander up and down the decks and fore and aft?
Oh yes, we walked. We in fact walked round the decks, and I think it was one of those ships where you walked round 8 times and you did a mile or something of that sort. But in fact, you could go either side, and one side you'd see a whale, and the other side you'd see something else, Faroe Islands, and so on. So it was exciting actually being at sea. Sometimes it was quite a turbulent sea, and then we went to Iceland and all that kind of thing. Yes, much enjoyed.
What was life spent doing on the ship? What could one do, for example?
Well, I spent quite a lot of time on deck seeing the views. I mean, seeing a whale was quite exciting, that kind of thing. And certainly the islands, and because when you sailed round the coast of Norway, it was full of interest, of wonderful mountains. And of course, when you got to one fjord, I think it was Loen Fjord, the ice from the glacier came right down to the sea, which was wonderful.
Spectacular to see.
Very spectacular, yes. We went to Iceland. That was our first visit to Iceland. And then we went across to Norway, to the fjords, and sailed down the coast, and Copenhagen, and then that's where in the Baltic.
How did you feel when you heard that? I mean, obviously relations with Germany were strained. And seeing the aeroplane hover around the ship on subsequent days, what feelings did you have?
Well, I think we all felt that something was going to happen. And I'd been to Germany, I knew the Germans and Austria and so on. And it was a very sad moment because, well, I think we did guess that there was trouble ahead. And it was one of the changes of one's life. Because then your career you were looking forward to had to be altered, and you joined the army and fought the war.
I don't think I've got any more questions for you, because up until obviously the voyage was cut short.
It did, yes.
And because of the world events that turned out. Did you? I know that afterwards you joined. You tried to sign up for the Navy, but they didn't.
Well, I did. Well, I volunteered for the Navy because my father was in RNVR. He was in charge of a flotilla of motor launches in the First World War. So, and I had a great grandfather and other people. Admiral Grenfell, who was the famous sailor. So there was a tradition of being in the Navy, as well as the Army too.
But they never had a job for you in the Navy, so you joined the
No,
Army
they
instead.
never had a job. But I had no qualifications, and obviously I would have had to have learned. But this I did in the Army, and we were taught octus and actually I joined up at Elgin as a sapper, learnt all about mines and that kind of thing. And ultimately I was given the job of teaching my division, Guards Armoured Division, all about mines, having learnt. Otherwise I wouldn't be here. I would be blown up.
And this is nothing to do with the Arandora Star, but I know at lunch you mentioned that you were part of the D-Day landings.
Not D-Day, no, my brother was on D-Day. I didn't land until I was the advance party of my division, Guards Armoured, and landed on Sword Beach, D+14.
And Sword Beach was the British beach.
And then my main job was dealing with the mines and bridge building. Beringen and various other ones that I was responsible for.
So you were responsible for decommissioning mines?
That was my expertise, or supposed to be. Well, it must have been fairly good because I survived doing patrols at night amongst S mines and that sort of thing. Well, if you didn't know it, you'd get blown up very quickly, but I did. And I hope I successfully taught others, saved their lives. And of course, they put booby traps all over Normandy, and when one had nothing else to do, one would deal with booby traps all the time, the bocage and hedgerows and that kind of thing. So it was, that was one of the main jobs.
What were you doing at 20 years old before the war? Were you studying?
I was studying, yes. I started studying. In fact, I got my degree in art and architecture. But that didn't qualify me for being an architect, so I became an architect after further study and passed all the RIB exams and that kind of thing. And then I joined an architectural practice, and I've been working in that practice, which I now as senior partner ever since. I'm still doing it in a modest way.